Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams as the co-host. Daniel, welcome today.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Good. As you know, we have a special guest today, and he's a friend of ours, and he's worked for me for a long time, and he's been on our show before, and his specialty is keeping up with what those guys are doing to us up in Washington. And in particular today, we want to visit with him on the Patriot Act.
Norm,
can I remember your name, Norm? Norm, welcome to our program today.
Thank you.
All right, very good. But we do want to talk about the Patriot Act because a lot is going on, and we've talked about it a lot, and we talked with you once on this not too long ago, and that has to do with the expiration of the Patriot Act at the end of this month. So are we going to be lucky enough that this will be gone on June 4th? And I know there's going to be legislative activity. I think the Senate's going into session over the weekend. And from my viewpoint, it looks like several things could happen. One, they could just let it expire. That's, I guess, a dream. The other thing is that they could pass the reform bill, which is the U.S. Freedom Act, or they could go along with reauthorization of the original bill. Tell us where we are legislatively, and tell us what you think is going to happen come Sunday night.
Well, at Campaign for Liberty, we're working very hard to try to stop this. We've been running a really successful program. Grassroots people are really energized with this. And Dr. Paul, as you've always said, this is another example where the people are so far ahead of the politicians in terms of wanting their liberty back. And unfortunately, the politicians still haven't gotten the message. So we're going to have to work a little bit harder, and maybe even through the weekend and past the weekend. Sunday evening, the Senate comes back into session at, I believe, 5. And unfortunately, they're only 3 votes away from getting enough to bring the USA Freedom Act to the floor. So we need to hold that. But even if they do that, the good news is that all that one senator would have to do is hold up the debate for 30 hours. And I think they could extend the debate to Thursday, which would push us past the expiration date, which would mean at that point USA Freedom might not be a valid bill anymore. They would have to then go back and write another bill, and then they would have to go through the House and Senate asking people to basically revote the Patriot Act, at which point it's a new ballgame, and who knows what kind of stuff might be in that, both bad, but maybe even something good, like Thomas Massey's bills to actually put real restraint, not phony restraint, on the surveillance state.
You know, under these circumstances, so often people look for compromises, come to the middle, and that's the Reform Act. Now, Daniel's looked at this, and he has a precise question about this, is this really good reform, and why are some of our pretty good guys in the Senate and the House tempted to vote for this, Daniel?
Yeah, it's interesting, Norm, that everywhere you see it in the mainstream media, the Freedom Act is always billed as this is the reform bill, and it makes it palatable, it makes it sound good. But from our reading of the Freedom Act, and I think you concur, it actually could be worse than the Patriot Act. First of all, we recently had this development where an appeals court ruled the Patriot Act, parts of the Patriot Act illegal because the act wasn't specific enough. And this bill seems like it would take care of that problem and would be specific. We actually ran an unnamed Capitol Hill source that Lou Rockwell wrote up, and this individual said that that there could be even more bulk collection under the Freedom Act than the Patriot Act.
Well, you're right. It does actually, for the first time, explicitly put into law that bulk collection is authorized. The proponents of it say, well, it's much less than what the NSA has been doing on their own, and whatever the merits or demerits, and personally I think that there's still no reason to authorize bulk collection. If the NSA is doing it on their own, you put into law that says you can't do that. You have to go to a Article III court and get a warrant. But after that, like you said, Daniel, after that appeals court decision, it's inexcusable for Congress to even consider authorizing this. And I don't understand why so many people who claim to be on our side are falling for this phony compromise. I think it's two things. One, there's a fear of appearing too extreme because, oh, you can't get rid of the Patriot Act. Don't you remember 9/11? So they want to feel like they're reasonable. And secondly, there's this, as both Daniel, you and Dr. Paul know, there's this obsession with getting things done in D.C., which leads a lot of politicians and outside groups and think tanks to say, well, what will the political class accept today? Because politics is the art of the possible, but they never think, gee, by taking a stronger position, how can we make what is impossible today the possible tomorrow?
You know,
sometimes,
the details of this to me are very important, but you know, the debate is important too, because, you know, when the court ruled, they ruled not anything to do with the Constitution or the Fourth Amendment. They just said that, well, legally it wasn't permissible, so therefore we just write a law. But the court didn't deal with the Constitution, and even this debate doesn't deal with the Constitution. Why can they just, you know, change the law and put it into the bill and say, oh, that we can do it now because it's legal to do it? It's just, to me, it's tragic that it's always ignored. I was once told in Congress that when I brought the Constitution up, and I was put down, and Norm, I think you might remember this, it was on the Workforce Committee, had to do with education, and I said, what about the Constitution now? And the chairman of the committee says, we don't deal with that. We always leave that to the courts, and I think that's part of where our problem is today.
there was that, and there was also, remember Henry Hyde's famous quote, which I know Daniel and you, Dr. Paul, remember well, that certain parts of the Constitution are, was it outdated?
Anachronistic.
Anachronistic, yes. So, and actually, if people want a reasonable compromise, I can suggest one. How about the Fourth Amendment, which says that the government actually can spy on you, can collect your data, can monitor your phone calls. All they have to do is go to a court, not the phony FISA court, but a real Article III independent court, show actual facts that demonstrate probable cause that you're a bad actor, and get a little thing called a warrant. That seems to me to be a perfectly reasonable compromise, because it's not telling the government you can never monitor terrorists or other bad actors. It's just saying you actually have to show a reason before you look at our private information.
We put up a video on the Institute website yesterday of Judge Napolitano, and he made some of the points you're making. He certainly said that the FISA court is a joke. He pointed out that out of 34,000 requests since 2001, all but 12 were granted. But he made another interesting point, Norm. I don't know if you had a chance to see the video, but he believes that the NSA bulk collection of Americans will continue no matter what happens. And his rationale is that there's Section 702, I believe it was, of the FISA law. But the other one that really struck me is a secret executive order signed by Bush in 2001 that directs the NSA to do this. And as Napolitano said, because the NSA is under the Defense Department and the President is Commander-in-Chief, that they may well continue to do this as a direct order of the Commander-in-Chief. So this whole debate may just be for show.
The Patriot Act stopped and 215 repealed. We still do have, as you pointed out, a lot of work to do. In addition to the executive order that you cited, there's also the executive order, I think it's 2133 that Reagan signed in '81, which has been used to justify bulk collection of our cell phone records, which always struck me as a little odd because what was the, some of our younger viewers might not remember this, but back in 1981, phones were still in your wall, and you know, there was no such thing. I don't think even the personal computer had caught on yet, much less the laptops and tablets. And all this technology, and yet that's being used. And I think you're right. Unless we this is going to be a long-term process, and we've gone further actually just in even delaying it and renewing and highlighting public attention to it and following up on this has been a tremendous achievement. But we need to keep fighting this battle because they're going to keep coming back to us, and the only way we can stop it is eventually just get rid of all these this mass surveillance apparatus and rein them in.
Right. You know, and once again, I think the real issue is the technical factors here of what the law might say and how they're going to get around it versus the Constitution. But it is, and I really agree with Napolitano on this statement, that it is, and Norm makes the point too, it's out of control government that is the problem. So if you don't declare war, the president declares war. If you don't finance it, they steal the money someplace, and the CIA goes into the drug business. All kinds of things that get around this, executive orders. That's where the real problem is. But there was a funny incident, not funny, it was sort of silly. My very first year I was in Congress, I won that special election in 1976, and there was an IMF bill, and that was one of my big interests, as it has always been, the monetary system. So they had the IMF bill, and the rationale for this is why it had to be passed is in 1971 we changed the law. We went off the gold standard and all these major changes. So for 5 years we had been living outside the law. So they explained to me very clearly, well, we have been doing these things and the law didn't conform to it. So we're changing the law to keep up, with what we've been doing. And they do that all the time. And if nobody notices, they don't even change the law. When they change the law, that means capitulation by the people, are sort of saying that is our endorsement. That's their sort of their confession to go along with it.
And that's what we might see this week with the USA Freedom Act. And it really is amazing that court decision just seems to have not affected the position of any so-called civil libertarian who's supporting this bill.
I think all you need to really know about the Freedom Act is that Obama loves it and he wants it passed. You know, if he wanted to end bulk collection, he could do it. So obviously, this is not in his.
And yet, according to a certain senator from South Carolina and a certain representative from New York, if you don't oppose mass surveillance and bulk collection and unlimited war, you don't belong in the Republican Party. So I guess Obama is a Republican, and I guess therefore Obamacare is a Republican program, at least according to some so-called conservatives.
Right. Well, anyway, this will be a busy weekend. I want to thank you, Norm, for being here with us today. And I'm sure that we are not going to have more freedom by Monday morning, but that doesn't mean that we can't keep doing what we're doing and what Campaign for Liberty is doing. They did a great job on teaching people about the danger of the Federal Reserve System, and now the work that they're doing. The people's attitudes have to change. When the people's attitudes change and the people are determined, some of the things we're talking about become insignificant because the people then influence the people and only send people there that agree with us. And that is where I'm optimistic. I think there's a growing number of people who are coming our way. We obviously don't have anything like a majority in Washington, but like Norm said, they're getting good responses and the people are probably way ahead of Congress. I've said that for years, that the Congress is way behind. I figure 10, 15 years behind the people. So anyway, thanks again, Norm, and I'd like to thank our viewers today and come back to the Liberty Report soon.